Good morning to you. It's about 6:14 in the morning on Thursday, May 16th. And here I am with another edition of Joe's Book Review. I'm completing up my reviews of Edgar Rice Burroughs books this week. So let me jump into the fact that we now have John Carter and the Giant of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This was a one-issue story that Edgar Rice Burroughs had put out in Amazing Stories magazine back in January of 1941. And together with the next short story, The Skeleton Men of Jupiter, these two short stories were actually collected into one volume that they just called John Carter of Mars. And that came out, I believe, in July of 1964. About 20 years after this one, at least. So, they've had John Carter books that were kind of all self-contained stories up until this point, and then he has these two short stories that kind of got put in one volume. And I believe that the fan base of Edgar Rice Burroughs is actually kind of fractured on whether or not they enjoy these short stories versus the long-form stories. So that's just one for what the crowd was like back in the 40s. And maybe beyond, because John Carter is kind of iconic in that way. And then this story as well, and I might have mentioned this before, the last book that came out, and I've done a review on it, was Lana of Gothal. And that was in Amazing Stories magazine over 4 issues over the course of a year. Okay? Started out in like April or whatever of 1941, and then every 2 months or so after that. This one actually came out in January of 1941, so it predates Lana of Gothal as far as publishing date's concerned. However, the events of one are autonomous from the other. So you can read them in almost in any order, but this is the order I have them from the books, from me to you. So now let me just start out in saying, this is a fun story. A nice little self-contained one. And like I said, it's a short story. I think when I converted this over to Microsoft Word, it ended up being only about 50 pages long with about a size 12 font. And that even included a few pictures along the way too, so it might even be just short of that. And on top of that, it's a 14-chapter short story. So you can do the math. Each chapter is only like 3 or 4 pages on average. So it's a very quick read, and it's exciting, so it's an even quicker read. So, fantastic. And he packs a lot into those 50 pages. And there goes the duck. So, I mean, in order to talk about the story real quick, and I'm really going to gloss this one really high, because I don't want to spoil some things in there. You have John Carter and Dejah Thoris pretty much just going about their day. Okay? In fact, they're riding one of those thoats throughout the land because Dejah Thoris actually has a kind of task. She has a chore she has to take care of, which is like checking out a forest or something like that. And we passed it so fast it's not important. But she routinely goes and checks out this one area for her father to make sure everything's all hunky-dory. Okay? They're going along, and all of a sudden, boom, action. And we have a monster that kind of like attacks them. And this is actually, it's called an Arbok. And it's some kind of like lizard type of thing. But it ends up being in their way. It's a little bit of an adventure, so let's go ahead, let's fight this and fight that. And it's kind of winning for a while. And John Carter has to go do what John Carter does, and he takes that sword out and takes care of what he does. And then when all the dust settles, he's looking for Dejah Thoris, who was supposed to help him at one point, and didn't. And then can't find her. Where is Dejah Thoris? Well, of course, in the role that Dejah Thoris has, she's taken. It's what she does in all these things. It's amazing. It's just it goes back to that thing I talked about once before about this women in refrigerators, where it's this concept of when you have a sci-fi or action story, sometimes the woman's role is to buffet up the men's role. They don't give them their own autonomy. And it happens very often that this Princess of Mars is constantly kidnapped. One of my listeners, actually, the name of Zeph Lodwick 1009, he wrote something about this, and we were joking about it on the audiobook. And I'm going to quote it real quick because he summed it up perfectly. He goes, "Look at the first book, A Princess of Mars, where she is kidnapped by the Tharks, and then by the Zodangas. Move on to the Gods of Mars, and she's kidnapped by the Therns and the Firstborn. And then Warlord of Mars, again kidnapped by the Therns and the Firstborn, even though that might be a continuation of the last book. But, Swords of Mars, first kidnapped by the Mafia, and then by the Taurids. And then you come to the Giant of Mars, where she's kidnapped again. It seems to be her role over and over again. Oh, man. To my gamers that are out there, this would be one of those, achievements that you have to try to unlock. Achievement. Don't let Deja Thoris kidnapped. And then you look it up. People who achieve this. 0.0000%. That's just too funny. But she's now missing. And as we move on, John Carter has to go home to Helium, say, "Hey, Jedak, your granddaughter's gone. Don't know what happened. The Thoat we were actually riding was killed. Got attacked by a monster, which supposedly wasn't there anymore. We gotta go find her." And they find almost like a ransom note saying, "Give over your iron smelting ore works to me, Pew Mogul, and then you'll see your daughter again. Otherwise, I'll send her back to you in pieces." Well, now we bring in some of the old tried and true allies to the story. You see him gather Tars Tarkas and Kantos Khan, and these are characters that he met and befriended back in the first book. So you gotta go way back in the memory machine to say, oh yeah, these long-standing friends are now gonna help him rescue Deja Thoris from this Pew Mogul. So they go out there, they make some plans, because it's where do you even start? Let's search everywhere, let's keep in contact. And as they go along, all of a sudden, they find an area where they think that she's going to be. In one of these long abandoned cities that are everywhere upon the planet. And somewhere in this adventure, John Carter gets captured. But he gets captured by a giant. So we get right into the giant in chapter 3, immediately. Well, the run-in with the giant leads to a little bit of captivity, which he finds a way to escape from, because he is Harry Houdini when it comes to escaping. That leads him into an encounter with these giant rats, and boom. Now we have a rat adventure. And the rat adventure is actually pretty cool, because while rats might have their own intelligence, they actually had a community. And while this whole thing's going on, there's no communication going on between John Carter and his captors. He's just expecting to get eaten at any second. So they're packing this whole sub-adventure into just 2 chapters, which has a nice, complete ring to it. And it was described very brilliantly, so it was great to see that in the story planned, we can chop it up into sub-storylines. So then, after the rat fiasco occurs, he comes face to face with the enemy, Pew Mogul. And cool enough, he's actually a throwback to the Hormads. He is a synthetic man that we were introduced to in the Synthetic Men of Mars. And they were created by Ras Thavas. And this specific one, Pew Mogul, was actually a pupil of Ras Thavas. So he has a little bit of the intelligence that it takes to do those experiments, which Ras Thavas was famous for in the second time that we saw him. Remember, the first time we saw him, his main thing was to embalm people and use either their whole body to transfer someone's brain into it, or to use parts of the body to help fix other people's ailments. Like, one warrior goes into battle and loses an arm. Okay, Rostavas can take an arm from another person and reattach it, and now you've got two good arms again. So he was almost like a medical doctor in a way, and we introduced him in the Mastermind of Mars. Oh, that's not a John Carter book per se. It's a Ulysses Paxton, another Earthman who found his way over to Mars. Then we saw Rostavas again 3 books later in The Synthetic Men of Mars. And in this one, besides being a person who was creating fake synthetic people, but now he's doing it under duress by the Council of the Seven Jeds because they want to take over all of Barsoom. He was actually looked for from the beginning from John Carter because Deja Thoris got into some flying car injury DUI, and she was like laid low, and he needed an expert physician to help her. So now they said, oh, one of these synthetic men used to work under Rostavas, got out, and now has delusions of grandeur of taking over the whole planet. So, again, Pew Mogul wants to rule the world. I gotta act better. And along the way, with his own scientific work, he creates this giant synthetic man to help him do it. And he even imbues him with some weird Rostavas chemical that makes his skin automatically replenish. So killing him would be extremely, extremely difficult. So now you've almost got like the bloodshot version of a synthetic giant 30-foot tall man they have to deal with. Oh, by the way, Pew Mogul also created a bunch of red man-brained white apes that are also in his army. People who he was able to kind of kidnap and capture, transfer their brains into the apes to say, later on, I'll get you a beautiful red body, which you didn't have before. Just in the meantime, kind of stay here with your powerhouse of a body, help me out, and once I rule the world, y'all get some great, beautiful bodies. Don't worry about it. Well, continuing, he now sees Pew Mogul, and there's a thing that goes on there. In fact, his friends are now captured and in chains in front of him. Tars Tarkas and the incomparable Deja Thoris. And it's one of those like, all right, we're all captured. Let me try to beat this guy right now. Oh no, I can't. I'm captured too. Let's move on. So Pew Mogul's going to say, listen, you know something? I'm sick of you guy already. I only kidnapped her to get the Iron Place so I can get some more weapons and airships. I'm going to go ahead and just start killing you and then start attacking them right away. So he sends the 3 of them off to one of those like slow-moving death traps, of course, that you cannot escape from. And it's pretty much like something from Dr. No in 007 time frames, where it's like, the laser is slowly going to come and cut you and walk away. I don't have to watch it because I know you're going to die. Same thing happens here. Going to put them in cages above the water pit, and there's lizards that are hungry underneath the water pit, and we'll just slowly drop you down into there, and then they will eat you. And then we'll be good. But while that's happening, I'm going to start my invasion, so see ya. Will they escape? And like I said, it's a short story, so it moves on pretty quickly. And now we see, while this is going on, Pew Mogul starts his invasion of Helium. Because another thing that happens also in these books is conquer Helium. It's the most powerful city on the planet. We conquer the rest of the planet. So he starts going after Helium. And not only is it underway, but he's doing rather well. I mean, he's got the giant that can stand off from a distance, throwing boulders like a catapult and just knocking down the city. He's got these powerful white apes as a ground force. He's even got these flying pterodactyl-like things called... name escapes me for a second. Oh, Malagors. These pterodactyl Malagors that the white apes ride. And what they end up doing is they've got bombs strapped with them. They'll just go over the city and just drop the bomb manually and just bombard the city. Come down, swoop in, bomb, swoop out. Even if there's a land army coming against everyone from Helium, just come in, boom, scatter the troops. So the invasion's going pretty well. And then the basic thing is, will John Carter be able to save Helium? Well, this is where I'll just leave you. And I'll say you're going to have to read or to listen and find out. In fact, I'll link the audiobook below if you're interested. It's a short. It's 2.5 hours long. You could do it in one day's commute if your commute isn't very good. And it's kind of worth the read. It's worth the listen. If you want to read it, I will also have a link down below to the text from Project Gutenberg Australia. In which case, you can actually see your own text. I think you can download it to your phone if you need to, or any other tablet, and then read it at your leisure. So, like I said, overall, I think it's a cool little story. But there's something interesting I saw on Wiki related to this, and let me read that here. The first story, I'm going to talk about the whole John Carter of Mars book, but the first story, The Giant of Mars, was originally published in 1940 by Whitman. I can't figure out who Whitman is, but by Whitman as a better line book entitled John Carter of Mars. Although credited to Edgar Rice Burroughs, it was written and illustrated by his son, John Coleman Burroughs, and was later expanded and republished in the January issue of Amazing Stories in 1941 as John Carter and the Giant of Mars. So, it's an Edgar Rice Burroughs. That's not Edgar Rice Burroughs. Okay. So therefore, it's like I'm in the universe of with other writers. And that can work. I mean, it's in the family anyway, so why not? But there is definitely a couple of hallmarks of Edgar Rice Burroughs that are curiously missing from this story when I read the words. And there's a few here that stood out as simply just being not usual. Okay? Let me go through the list. It's only about 4 things. The first is John Carter and his name. Okay? Pretty quickly, the action, the dialogue tags, and all that kind of stuff doesn't use John Carter like Edgar Rice Burroughs uses it always. It just gets shortened and becomes Carter. Where it's not John Carter whips out his sword and goes after the Yarbok, or John Carter grabs Deja-Thoris and swings off of the balcony, or whatever it is. It just says Carter. Carter jumps up and lands on the Thark and runs away towards the enemy. Or Carter didn't like what he was hearing, decided to change the subject. So it's just something that when you saw it, it wasn't John, it was Carter. So I just never remembered seeing that in any other previous stories. So like I said, it felt a little odd. I can't explain it better than that. It's just one of those things of, this is new writing. And new writing can happen when a writer just evolves and says, oh, I'm going to start doing it like this. Like I always like to laugh about when he talks about his love, Deja-Thoris. It's always like the title is The Incomparable Deja-Thoris, or Incomparable, depending upon how you want to say it. So that's what he always says. So if he referred to her in a different phrase, my lovely and alluring Deja-Thoris, it would be noticeable because it was always written as incomparable. The second thing I noticed when it popped up in one paragraph is the moons of Barsoom. Okay, now up to date, we've always known them as Thuria and Chloros. Okay, in the second chapter of this book, they actually get referred to as Deimos and Phobos. Now, there's only 2 moons that surround Mars, or Barsoom, if you will. So, And they might be the actual true names of the moons of Mars. I don't know that much about astrology, but I'm just going to go with it. But they are the Earthman names of it. In Barsoom, they're always Thuria and Chloros. And in fact, John Carter even went to Thuria in an adventure during the Swords of Mars. So it was always Thuria, Chloros. That's what Edgar Rice Burroughs always said. That was his moon names. But all of a sudden, boom, Deimos, Phobos. So again, you see the detail that even when I read that, I was like, wait, what Deimos and Phobos? Well, they're the moons, but there's something. All right, I'll get past it. Not important to interrupt the full story, but I'll get past it. But again, something that was different and noticeable. The third item I have here is the rats. Okay, and I know I've mentioned this before, and I kind of find it funny by its mere absence here, but on Barsoom, the word for rat is ulcio. Okay, and ERB loves using ulcio a lot for different things. You know, an ulcio is a rat. An ulcio can be a curse word. In fact, one time there's a character's name, Rapace the Ulcio. So, ulcio was created and then is used pretty often. And I know one of the things that it's funny he usually gets around this by is the forewords of a lot of these stories is John Carter coming back to Earth, seeing an old friend or even a son or a relative, and they have a quick little tete-a-tete, and he narrates the story, and the story becomes the book or whatever you read. Okay? But here, they didn't really have that. So, and the one thing is, because the person who wrote down the story is an Earthman, and they're just telling you the tales of someone else's life, it's allowed that every now and again they can populate references on Earth that don't happen on Barsoom. So for instance, and this is a popular one, if you put your foot up when you're sitting on a chair on an ottoman, well, an ottoman is from Ottoman people here, that's why it's named that. I don't think they have Ottomans on Mars. So it wouldn't be called an Ottoman. Or if you say like, oh, that's the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, that's an idiom from Earth because we have camels and we load them like pack mules, and you put that extra straw in there and that's the thing that breaks the back. It's not the straw was too strong, it was too much laden on the camel. But to say that phrase, you have to have camels on your planet. If you don't have camels on if you don't have camels on Barsoom, you can't really use the phrase "the straw that broke the camel's back," unless you're an Earthman telling the story of a person on Mars. Then you can kind of throw the idiom in there because it's you making the mistake, not a person from Mars saying it. So, if they have ulcios on Barsoom and you, the Earth writer, calls them rats, that's fine. We have Marvel has these things called no prizes, Marvel Comics, where if you find an error, but then you can explain away the error, you actually receive a no prize. You can get a no prize by using the I keep saying American. It probably is American because usually he comes back to America, but an Earthman phrase for a Mars adventure. However, in this story, where they've got 2 full chapters full of rats, plus a little bit later on, in a non-spoiler, never once are they named an ulcio. It's always rats, 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 rats. So either the son didn't like that word, didn't remember the word, didn't read the books themselves, and that's why it's such a, contained story. It's, again, a curious omission to a story where you're just, I know he's going to say ulcio 15 times here, and he never says it once. The last point, the fourth point, is it's a minor thing. It's the use of the term Earthman. The Earthman jumped up and grabbed the thing by its head and twisted its neck or whatever. they used Earthman a lot to describe John Carter. And they've used it before in the past. And in fact, there's one story, it might have been during Land of Gothal, where he starts talking about, like, I don't even consider myself an Earthman anymore. I've been a Red Man for as long as I remember. I've always been this age. I never remember a childhood. I don't remember growing up. I've just always been, which is always weird when I read that passage in that book, because it does talk about him being a Virginian as well in the same book. So, again, it's one of those things. So here, he referred to him as an Earthman a lot more often than I've ever read him in all the stories before. So, again, not much to say on this one. It was just noticeable. So, there you have it. It's a nice, fun story. And you can read it on your own, or you can listen to my version. There might even be another version out there somewhere, who knows. But, put it in your library sometime. Again, 50 pages or 2.5 hour listen. It's all good. So I'll conclude here. I'll say I hope this was helpful. On these channels we always say this. I usually don't like to say it explicitly, but please throw a like down there. Subscribe to the channel. It gets this thing more popular, and who knows, maybe I can grab some of that YouTube money that's lying around there. It costs nothing to you, and it means the world to me. Okay? I'll just finalize here and say, I hope you've enjoyed. Happy reading, and I'll see you again here sometime very soon. Bye-bye now.